Hello, my dear friends. Tonight, we begin a slow and thoughtful journey into a familiar yet often unnoticed part of daily life. All around us, there are rules we follow without question. We stand in certain ways. We speak in certain forms. We obey habits, customs, and expectations that feel natural, even necessary. Yet many of these rules were not created for the modern world at all. They were shaped centuries ago, during the medieval period, to solve problems that no longer exist. Medieval society was governed by rules that ordered life very carefully. These rules controlled behavior, movement, speech, clothing, work, and even silence. They were designed for a world of rigid hierarchy, limited technology, and constant uncertainty. Over time, many of these rules lost their original purpose, but they did not disappear. Instead, they faded into habit. We inherited them quietly. One of the most important medieval ideas was order. Medieval life depended on clear boundaries. People needed to know their place, their role, and their limits. Rules were not only about safety, they were about visibility. A rule told others who you were, where you belonged, and how you should be treated. This logic shaped customs that still survive today, even though the original social structure has vanished. For example, medieval rules around standing, bowing, waiting, and speaking were tied to power. You stood to show respect because sitting in someone's presence implied equality. You waited to speak because speech itself was authority. These actions were not polite gestures in the modern sense, they were signals of obedience and survival. Over time, the danger faded, but the behavior remained. Medieval rules also emerged from fear. Fear of disease, fear of chaos, fear of divine punishment, and fear of social disorder shaped everyday habits. Rules told people when to eat, when to rest, when to work, and when to remain silent. Once repeated for generations, these rules became tradition. Tradition, unlike law, rarely disappears when its reason does. Another reason medieval rules survived is repetition. Medieval life changed slowly. Customs passed from parent to child, master to apprentice, priest to parishioner. When later centuries arrived, people often kept old rules simply because they felt normal. No one stopped to ask why. The rule had always been there. Modern life inherited these habits without their explanations. We still follow them, not because they protect us, but because breaking them feels uncomfortable. This discomfort is the shadow of medieval order, still resting in modern behavior. From a historical perspective, these rules are not meaningless. They are echoes. Each one points back to a time when behavior carried risk, when order mattered more than freedom, and when survival depended on knowing exactly how to act. As this first part settles into calm, imagine a medieval town square at dawn. People move carefully. Voices are low. Everyone follows rules they did not create but deeply understand. These rules shaped the world. Some of them are still shaping us. One of the clearest ways medieval rules still survive in modern life is through how we stand, sit, wait, and show respect. These actions feel natural today, but in medieval society they were not optional manners. They were strict rules tied to power, rank, and safety. Failing to follow them could lead to punishment, humiliation, or worse. In medieval Europe, standing was a sign of submission. Sitting in the presence of someone more powerful than you was not simply rude, It was dangerous. Only those of equal or higher rank were permitted to sit freely. Everyone else stood, often for long periods. This rule existed because posture communicated hierarchy instantly in a world where literacy was limited. You did not need words to show who mattered. Your body spoke for you. This is why standing when someone important enters a room became a rule. It was not about courtesy. It was about acknowledging dominance. Over time, the threat behind this rule disappeared, but the habit remained. Today, we stand for judges, officials, teachers, and sometimes elders, even though the original power imbalance no longer carries physical risk. The action survives, stripped of its original danger, but still carrying emotional weight. Waiting is another medieval rule that persists. In medieval society, waiting was enforced obedience. Lower-ranking individuals waited to be spoken to, waited to eat, waited to move, and waited to leave. Acting too soon was seen as overstepping one's place. This rule maintained order in crowded courts, halls, and households where authority needed to be constantly visible. Even today, waiting quietly is seen as polite. Speaking out of turn feels wrong. Interrupting authority feels uncomfortable. These feelings are inherited, not logical. They come from centuries where waiting protected people from punishment. The rule outlived the threat. Silence itself was a medieval rule. Speaking without permission could be interpreted as challenge or rebellion. In courts and noble households, silence showed loyalty. Words carried power, and misuse of speech could have serious consequences. This is why medieval etiquette manuals emphasized restraint of speech above almost everything else. Modern professional environments still reflect this rule. Silence in meetings, classrooms, and formal spaces feels respectful, even when participation is encouraged. The discomfort of speaking freely is not modern anxiety alone. It is the echo of medieval discipline. Bowing, nodding, and lowering the head also come from medieval hierarchy. These gestures reduced physical presence, signaling non-threat. A lowered head meant submission. Eye contact with a superior could be seen as defiance. Today, slight nods and lowered gazes still signal respect, even though we no longer consciously associate them with danger. From a historical perspective, these rules survived because they were reinforced daily for centuries. Bodies learned them before minds questioned them. Once embedded, they no longer needed explanation. They became instinct. As this part continues calmly, imagine a medieval hall. People stand quietly. They wait. They speak only when permitted. Authority moves without raising its voice. These rules were once necessary. Now they are invisible habits we still obey. Clothing is one of the strongest places where medieval rules still quietly control modern life. What we wear when we wear it and how seriously we take appearance often feels like personal choice. Historically, it was not. In medieval society, clothing was law. It told others exactly who you were, what you were allowed to do, and how you should be treated. Wearing the wrong thing was not a fashion mistake. It was a violation. Medieval Europe enforced strict dress rules known today as sumptuary laws. These laws controlled fabrics, colors, lengths, and accessories according to social rank. Peasants could not wear silk. Merchants could not dress like nobles. Certain colors, such as deep purple or bright crimson, were reserved for royalty or the church. These rules existed because society depended on instant visual order. Clothing replaced identity cards in a world without documentation. This is why dressing appropriately still feels important today. The anxiety around wearing the wrong clothes in the wrong place is inherited. Medieval clothing rules trained people to understand that appearance carried consequences. Even when the law disappeared, the emotional rule remained. The idea that formal situations require formal clothing comes directly from medieval hierarchy. In medieval courts, formality was not optional. Special garments were worn to mark serious moments such as judgment, ceremony, or oath-taking. Casual clothing in these spaces would signal disrespect or rebellion. Today, formal dress still signals seriousness, even when no punishment exists for ignoring it. Uniforms also trace their roots to medieval rules. Soldiers, servants, clergy, and guild members wore specific clothing to show role and loyalty. Uniforms made authority visible and obedience expected. Modern uniforms, school, work, or ceremonial, continue this function. They reduce individuality and reinforce order, even when their original necessity has vanished. The discomfort many people feel when underdressed or overdressed is not modern insecurity alone. It is historical memory. Medieval society punished visual mistakes. Over time, that fear became internalized as embarrassment rather than danger. Even rules about covering the body come from medieval morality. Modesty laws were enforced differently by class and gender. Showing too much skin could invite punishment or shame. These rules were linked to religious belief and social control. While modern standards have changed, the idea that certain body exposure is inappropriate in certain settings remains deeply medieval in origin. Head coverings also carry medieval legacy. Removing hats indoors, covering heads in religious spaces, or uncovering as a sign of respect all come from medieval rules about visibility and humility. The head symbolized status. Controlling it controlled behavior. From a historical perspective, clothing rules survived because they were constantly reinforced. People learned them from childhood. They became habits before they became thoughts. Today we follow them without knowing why, calling them professionalism, decency, or common sense. As this part continues quietly, imagine a medieval street. Everyone's clothing speaks before they do. Rank, role, and rule are visible in fabric and color. That language of clothing has never fully disappeared. Our relationship with time is another quiet inheritance from the medieval world. Today, clocks rule our lives. We arrive on time, we wait for specific hours. We feel guilt when we are late, and anxiety when schedules break. These habits feel modern, but their emotional force was shaped centuries ago, long before personal watches or digital reminders existed. In medieval society, time was not personal. It belonged to the church, the Lord, and the community. Bells controlled daily life. Church bells marked prayer times, work hours, meals, and rest. Town bells signaled when markets opened, when gates closed, and when danger approached. Individuals did not decide their own schedules. Time was imposed from above. Obeying time was not optional. Missing a bell could mean missing food, work, protection, or religious duty. Over time, people learned to respond instantly to sound. Bells trained bodies, not minds. This conditioning created deep obedience to external time signals, a habit that survived even when bells were replaced by clocks. The medieval rule of punctuality was rooted in obedience, not efficiency. Arriving late was seen as disrespectful or disobedient. Timekeeping showed loyalty to authority. This is why being late still feels morally wrong, not merely inconvenient. The emotion attached to lateness is medieval, not logical. Waiting for the right time also comes from medieval control of movement. Markets opened at fixed hours. Gates closed at sunset. Travel, trade, and even speech followed temporal rules. Acting outside the approved time could bring punishment. Modern ideas of opening hours, deadlines, and office schedules carry the same structure, though the original danger is gone. The division of the day itself is medieval. Morning for work, midday for rest, evening for quiet, night for silence. These divisions were enforced through religious and civic rules. Nighttime movement was restricted. Curfews existed to control populations and prevent disorder. Even today, night still feels like a boundary, a time when behavior changes, rooted in old rules of safety and control. The idea that productivity defines a good day also has medieval origins. Medieval labor was organized by daylight and season, but idleness was viewed with suspicion. Being busy signaled obedience and moral order. This belief survived into modern work culture, where rest often feels undeserved unless earned. From a historical perspective, modern time discipline is not about clocks. It is about control learned through centuries of repetition. We obey schedules instinctively because medieval life trained generations to fear disorder and time. As this part continues quietly, imagine a medieval town at dawn. A bell rings, doors open, work begins. Another bell will end it. Life moves to sound and signal, not choice. That rhythm still echoes in our days. Eating and behavior at the table are among the most deeply medieval rules still alive in modern life. The way we sit, wait, stay quiet, use utensils, and judge others' manners feels natural today. Historically, these behaviors were not about comfort or politeness. They were about control, hierarchy, and safety in a world where food and power were tightly connected. In medieval society, meals were public displays of order. Who ate first, who sat closest to the host, who spoke, and who remained silent, all followed strict rules. These rules existed because food was not guaranteed. Famine was real. Access to food showed favor and protection. Table behavior signaled loyalty and rank. Silence at the table was one of the strongest medieval rules. Speaking while eating could be seen as disrespectful or greedy. In noble households, silence showed discipline. Lower-ranking individuals were expected to eat quietly, quickly, and without drawing attention. This rule survives today in the discomfort we feel around loud eating or talking with a full mouth. The emotion attached to it comes from centuries of enforced restraint. Waiting before eating is another medieval inheritance. In medieval halls, no one began eating until the highest-ranking person did. Starting early was an insult and a challenge to authority. This is why waiting for everyone to be served still feels right, even in informal settings. The rule no longer protects us, but it still governs behavior. The idea of proper table posture also comes from medieval discipline. Sitting upright, keeping elbows controlled, and limiting movement were ways to show self-control. Disorder at the table suggested moral weakness. This belief survives in how posture is still linked to manners, professionalism, and respect. Utensil use carries medieval roots as well. Forks were slow to spread in medieval Europe and were sometimes viewed with suspicion. Hands, knives, and shared dishes were common. Because of this, rules about hand cleanliness became strict. Washing hands before meals was essential, not symbolic. Today, hand washing before eating still feels mandatory. Even when food is wrapped or protected, sharing food required order. Medieval meals often involved shared bowls and plates. Rules controlled who reached where and when. Touching food carelessly was dangerous and offensive. Modern discomfort around touching shared food reflects this long memory of risk. Meals were also moments of observation. Behavior at the table could raise or destroy reputation. Children were trained early to sit still, eat quietly, and obey rules. These habits were enforced through correction and shame. Over generations, these rules became instinct rather than instruction. Religious influence strengthened these habits. Meals were often connected to prayer and gratitude. Order at the table reflected order of the soul. Eating without control was linked to sin. Even today, overeating or messy eating carries moral judgment that goes beyond health. From a historical perspective, table manners survived because they were trained into bodies from childhood. They did not require explanation. They became part of identity. Modern society inherited them stripped of danger but full of emotional weight. As this long part continues quietly, imagine a medieval great hall at supper. Bowls are placed. Everyone waits. Silence settles. Food is eaten carefully, watched closely. These rules once protected lives. Now they shape habits without explanation. The rules we still follow about knocking, entering rooms, waiting for permission, and respecting private space are deeply medieval in origin. Today, these behaviors feel like simple politeness. In the medieval world, they were about survival, safety, and control. Entering the wrong space at the wrong time could bring punishment, suspicion, or violence. Medieval buildings were not designed for privacy as we understand it today. Most people lived and worked in shared spaces. Lords held court in great halls. Servants slept near their masters. Families shared rooms. Because physical privacy was rare, behavioral rules became essential. Permission replaced walls. Knocking replaced locks. Entering a room without announcement was dangerous. It could be interpreted as spying, challenging authority, or intending harm. In castles and noble houses, access to rooms was tightly controlled. Guards, servants, and officials monitored who could enter and when. Waiting outside a door signaled obedience and respect. This is why waiting to be invited inside became a rule. Knocking itself was a signal of submission. It announced presence while acknowledging authority. You were saying, without words, that you did not assume the right to enter. This behavior survives today. Walking into a room unannounced still feels wrong, even when no authority is threatened. The discomfort is inherited. Medieval rules around private chambers were especially strict. A lord's chamber was a place of power, not rest. Entering it without permission implied challenge. Even high-ranking individuals announced themselves. Over time, this rule spread beyond nobility and became general behavior. The idea that certain spaces belonged to certain people became normalized. Waiting outside rooms also controlled information. Medieval power depended on secrecy. Hearing the wrong conversation or witnessing the wrong moment could be dangerous. Rules about waiting protected authority and reduced risk. Modern respect for closed doors, even in safe environments, reflects this long history of controlled access. The concept of personal space also has medieval roots. Touching someone without permission could be seen as aggression or insult. Standing too close implied threat. Rules developed to regulate distance between bodies, especially across social ranks. These rules became internalized. Today, standing too close still feels uncomfortable, even without danger. As literacy increased slowly, written permission replaced physical presence in some settings. But the behavior remained. Asking before entering, waiting to be called, and respecting closed spaces became habits passed through generations. From a historical perspective, modern ideas of privacy are built on medieval control, not modern freedom. The rules survived because they reduced conflict. Even when the threat disappeared, the behavior felt correct. As this part continues quietly, imagine a medieval corridor at night. A door stands closed. Someone waits outside, silent, respectful, unmoving. Permission matters. That pause still lives with us today. The way we speak to authority today is shaped by medieval rules that once protected lives. Titles, formal language, respectful tone, and controlled speech feel like manners now, but in medieval society they were instruments of survival. Saying the wrong word, using the wrong name, or speaking too freely could carry serious consequences. In medieval Europe, language was power. Speech revealed loyalty, education, and rank. Addressing someone incorrectly was not a minor mistake. It could be interpreted as insult or rebellion. Lords, clergy, and officials expected to be addressed with precise titles. These titles reinforced hierarchy every time they were spoken aloud. Saying "My Lord" or "Your Grace" reminded both speaker and listener of their place. This is why formal titles still feel necessary today. Words like "Sir," "Madam," "Your Honor," and "Doctor" survive as echoes of medieval structure. Even when authority is symbolic, removing the title feels disrespectful. The emotional weight of titles comes from centuries when words protected speakers from punishment. Medieval rules also controlled who was allowed to speak. Lower-ranking individuals were expected to speak only when invited. Interrupting authority could be seen as defiance. Silence showed obedience. This rule trained people to measure their words carefully. Modern discomfort with interrupting teachers, managers, or officials reflects this inherited restraint. Tone mattered as much as content. Speaking too loudly, too confidently, or too casually toward authority could signal challenge. Medieval etiquette emphasized calm, controlled speech. This is why professionalism today still values measured tone. Passionate or emotional speech can feel inappropriate in formal settings even when honesty is encouraged. Written language followed the same rules. Medieval letters opened with long expressions of humility. Writers lowered themselves verbally to protect their position. This practice shaped formal correspondence for centuries. Even today, emails and letters often begin politely, even when directness would be more efficient. The habit is historical, not logical. Names themselves carried rules. Using a first name without permission implied equality. Addressing elders or superiors by given name could be offensive. This rule survives in the discomfort many feel when calling authority figures by their first name, even when invited to do so. Language was also regulated by class. Certain words, accents, and expressions marked education and status. Speaking incorrectly could expose someone as low-ranking. This created anxiety around speech that still exists today. Fear of sounding unprofessional or uneducated has medieval roots. From a historical perspective, these language rules survived because they became internal. People learned them early and passed them on unconsciously. The danger faded, but the behavior remained. As this part continues quietly, imagine a medieval court. Words are chosen carefully. Titles are spoken slowly. Silence holds power. Speech is never casual. That careful language still shapes our voices today. The habit of waiting in line, keeping order, and respecting turn-taking feels deeply modern, yet its roots reach back into medieval life. Queuing was not organized with ropes or signs, but the rule of order was enforced through authority and fear of punishment. Waiting your turn was not polite behavior. It was a survival skill. Medieval towns were crowded spaces. Markets, wells, mills, courts, and churches brought large numbers of people together. Without clear order, these places could quickly descend into conflict. To prevent chaos, strict rules governed who went first and who waited. Rank often decided position, but even within the same class, order mattered. At wells and water sources, waiting was essential. Water was life. Pushing ahead could start fights or draw punishment from town officials. Over time, communities developed informal systems of turn-taking. Everyone knew who arrived first. Breaking this order could damage reputation and invite retaliation. Markets followed similar rules. Vendors served customers in order, but priority could be given to certain individuals. Still, visible waiting reduced disputes. Standing patiently showed respect for communal rules. This behavior survives today as discomfort when someone cuts the line. The emotional reaction is inherited from times when disorder meant danger. Churches enforced order strongly. Seating and movement followed strict hierarchy. People entered, knelt, and exited according to position. Moving out of turn was seen as disruptive and disrespectful. These habits trained bodies to wait without instruction. Modern queues inherit this silent discipline. Courts and official gatherings reinforced waiting rules. Petitioners waited hours or days to be heard. Speaking or approaching out of turn could result in punishment. Waiting became proof of loyalty and patience. This belief survives today in how waiting is linked to fairness and legitimacy. The idea that order equals fairness is medieval in origin. Medieval authorities used order to prevent violence and maintain control. Over time, people internalized this logic. Waiting felt just. Cutting ahead felt wrong, even if no rule was broken. From a historical perspective, queuing survived because it reduced conflict. It worked. Even when formal authority faded, the habit remained because it felt safer than disorder. As this part continues quietly, imagine a medieval well at midday. People stand patiently, watching, waiting. No sign tells them to do so. The rule lives in memory and habit. That same rule still guides us today. The way we think about work, rest, and time off is deeply shaped by medieval rules that once controlled survival itself. Today we speak of weekends, holidays, and breaks, yet many people still feel guilt when they stop working. This feeling does not come from modern productivity culture alone. It is rooted in medieval ideas about labor, obedience, and moral worth. In medieval society, work was not simply a means of earning. It was a moral duty. Labor showed obedience to God, loyalty to one's Lord, and usefulness to the community. Idleness, on the other hand, was feared. It was associated with sin, disorder, and temptation. This belief was reinforced constantly through sermons, laws, and daily routine. Rest was allowed, but it was controlled. Medieval people did not rest because they chose to. They rested because authority permitted it. Religious calendars determined days of rest. Sundays and holy days were enforced pauses, not personal breaks. Working on these days could result in punishment. Rest was obedience, not freedom. This is why rest still feels conditional today. Many people feel they must earn time off. Relaxation without justification creates discomfort. That emotion is medieval. It comes from a world where rest without permission was seen as dangerous. The idea of a proper end to the workday also comes from medieval control. Work began at sunrise and ended at sunset. Bells marked the transition. Stopping too early could suggest laziness. Stopping too late could disrupt order. These boundaries taught people when it was acceptable to rest. Modern work schedules still follow this structure, even indoors and under artificial light. Medieval guilds reinforced strict work rhythms. Craftsmen worked set hours. Apprentices followed rigid schedules. Time was regulated not for efficiency, but for discipline. Being seen working mattered. Visibility of labor was proof of loyalty and worth. This belief survives in modern discomfort around leaving work early, even when tasks are complete. Even holidays carried rules. Medieval festivals were not free time. They followed strict rituals, schedules, and expectations. Joy was allowed, but within limits. Excessive pleasure could bring punishment or shame. This is why modern holidays often feel structured rather than truly free. From a historical perspective, the guilt around rest is not natural. It was trained. Medieval society needed constant labor to survive. That need shaped moral values. Those values survived long after the conditions changed. As this part continues quietly, imagine a medieval village at dusk. The bell rings, tools are set down, work ends, not by choice, but by rule. Rest begins, measured and watched. That same feeling still shapes how we stop today. The feeling of guilt we experience when breaking rules, even small and harmless ones, is one of the strongest legacies of medieval law and punishment. In the medieval world, rules were not suggestions. They were deeply tied to fear, morality, and survival. Law was not only enforced by courts but by community pressure, religion, and constant observation. Over time, this created an internal sense of guilt that outlived the punishments themselves. Medieval law was everywhere. It governed movement, speech, work, clothing, worship, and behavior. People lived in close communities where privacy was rare. Everyone watched everyone else. Breaking a rule was not just a legal risk, it was a social danger. Reputation mattered deeply, and shame could follow a person for life. This environment trained people to obey even when no authority was present. Punishment in medieval times was public. Fines, stocks, public confession, and humiliation were common. The purpose was not only correction, but warning. Seeing others punished reinforced obedience. Over generations, people learned to fear rule-breaking instinctively. Even minor violations carried emotional weight. This is why modern rule-breaking often triggers anxiety far greater than the actual consequence. Religious belief strengthened this system. Medieval Christianity taught that law reflected divine order. Breaking rules was not just illegal, it was sinful. Guilt became spiritual. Confession, repentance, and forgiveness were structured responses to rule breaking. This moral framework taught people to judge themselves constantly. Even today, guilt often feels internal and moral rather than rational. Another key medieval idea was collective responsibility. Families, guilds, and villages could be punished for individual actions. This encouraged self-policing. People corrected themselves to protect others. The fear of harming the group reinforced obedience. Modern discomfort around causing trouble or making things difficult reflects this inherited responsibility. Written law was limited, but custom was powerful. Many medieval rules were unwritten yet strictly enforced. People followed them because it has always been done this way. This phrase still ends arguments today. The authority of tradition is medieval at its core. The idea that rules apply even when they make no sense comes from this system. Medieval rules did not require explanation. Obedience itself was the goal. Questioning rules could be seen as rebellion. This trained generations to obey first and understand later, if at all. From a historical perspective, modern guilt around minor rule-breaking is not irrational. It is historical memory. Medieval society embedded obedience so deeply that it became part of identity. Even when punishment disappeared, the feeling remained. As this long part continues quietly, imagine a medieval square. A small rule is broken. The crowd watches. Shame spreads faster than punishment. That lesson settled into the body. We still carry it. Many of the expectations we still carry around marriage, relationships, and gender roles were shaped by medieval rules that once controlled inheritance, power, and survival. Today, these expectations often feel cultural or personal, but historically, they were enforced systems designed to keep society stable and predictable. Even after the laws faded, the behaviors remained. In medieval society, marriage was not primarily about love. It was a legal and economic arrangement. Families used marriage to secure land, alliances, labor, and social position. Because of this, strict rules governed who could marry, when, and under what conditions. Obedience within marriage was essential, not romantic. Gender roles were clearly defined. Men were associated with authority, protection, and public life. Women were associated with obedience, household order, and reproduction. These roles were reinforced by law, religion, and custom. Breaking them could bring punishment, shame, or exclusion. Over time, these expectations became internalized rather than enforced. This is why certain behaviors still feel normal or expected even when they no longer serve a purpose. The idea that men should lead or provide, and women should manage care and emotional labor, comes directly from medieval household rules. These roles were survival strategies in a rigid economy. Today, they persist as habits and assumptions. Medieval marriage rules also shaped modern discomfort around deviation. Choosing not to marry, marrying late, or rejecting traditional roles once threatened social order. People who lived outside these structures were viewed with suspicion. That suspicion echoes today in subtle pressure, judgment, or concern when someone does not follow expected paths. The idea of marital obedience left deep traces. Medieval law often positioned the husband as legal authority over the household. While modern law rejects this, emotional remnants remain. The discomfort around conflict in marriage, the expectation of compromise from certain partners, and the fear of social judgment all trace back to medieval enforcement of harmony through hierarchy. Sexual behavior was also tightly controlled. Medieval rules governed modesty, fidelity, and reproduction. These rules were enforced through shame rather than constant punishment. As a result, internal guilt became stronger than external law. Modern feelings of shame or discomfort around sexuality often come from this long history rather than personal belief. Even wedding rituals carry medieval structure. Public ceremonies, witnesses, vows, and formal language all come from a time when marriage had to be visible to be legitimate. Privacy was not trusted. Public acknowledgement protected property and lineage. Today, we still follow these rituals even when their original purpose is gone. From a historical perspective, modern relationship expectations are not purely emotional. They are inherited systems. Medieval society shaped behavior so deeply that it survived legal reform. What once maintained order now lingers as tradition. As this part continues quietly, imagine a medieval household settling for the night. Roles are clear, expectations are fixed. Harmony is enforced through habit rather than choice. That structure still whispers through modern life. The way we experience education, discipline, and obedience today is deeply shaped by medieval rules that once governed learning as an act of control rather than curiosity. In medieval society, education was not designed to develop individual thought. It existed to preserve order, transmit authority, and reinforce obedience. These foundations still shape how classrooms, instruction, and authority feel in the modern world. In the medieval period, learning was closely tied to the church. Schools were often attached to monasteries or cathedrals, and teachers were clerics. Knowledge was sacred, not neutral. To question too freely was dangerous. Students were trained to listen, repeat, memorize, and obey. Silence was valued more than understanding. This approach created a model of learning where authority spoke and others received. Discipline was central to medieval education. Physical punishment was common and accepted. It was believed that pain corrected both behavior and character. Obedience was seen as a moral virtue. This belief shaped generations to associate learning with fear and correction rather than exploration. Even today, anxiety around making mistakes or speaking incorrectly in educational settings reflects this long history. The structure of classrooms also has medieval roots. Rows facing a central authority figure reinforce hierarchy. The teacher speaks, others listen. This arrangement mirrors medieval halls where knowledge flowed in one direction. Even when modern education encourages participation, the physical structure still carries authority. Questioning authority in medieval education was risky. Students who challenged teachers or doctrine could be punished or expelled. This trained people to suppress doubt. Modern discomfort with questioning teachers, managers, or experts often reflects this inherited caution rather than rational fear. Grades, evaluations, and approval systems also echo medieval judgment. Medieval learners were assessed not only on knowledge, but on obedience and behavior. Approval mattered because it granted access to future opportunity. Today, approval still carries emotional weight beyond its practical value. Respect for authority figures remains strong. Standing when a teacher enters, speaking formally, waiting to be called upon, all reflect medieval classroom discipline. These actions no longer protect students from punishment, yet they feel natural and correct. From a historical perspective, modern education carries both enlightenment and inheritance. While content has changed, structure remains. Medieval rules shaped learning environments so deeply that even freedom still wears the shape of obedience. As this part continues quietly, imagine a medieval classroom. Candles burn low. A teacher speaks. Students sit still, silent, attentive. Knowledge moves slowly, guarded by authority. That posture still lives in modern learning spaces. The way we think about travel, movement, permission, and borders is another quiet inheritance from medieval rules that once controlled safety, loyalty, and power. Today, carrying documents, asking permission, and explaining where we are going feels normal. In the medieval world, movement itself was dangerous and deeply regulated. Freedom of travel did not exist as a right. It existed only by approval. In medieval society, most people were expected to stay where they were born. Land ownership, labor duties, and protection were tied to place. Leaving without permission could be seen as desertion or rebellion. Serfs were legally bound to land. Traveling without approval could result in punishment. This created a culture where movement required justification. Travel documents have medieval roots. Letters of passage, seals, and permissions were required to move safely between regions. These documents proved loyalty and identity in a world without photographs or databases. Without proof, travelers could be detained, questioned, or punished. Modern passports and IDs follow the same logic, even though the original dangers are gone. Roads were controlled spaces. Town gates closed at night. Guards questioned strangers. Movement after dark was suspicious. Curfews existed to control populations and prevent unrest. This is why night travel still feels risky and restricted, even when infrastructure is safe. The emotion attached to movement comes from medieval control, not modern danger. Hospitals, inns, and monasteries required proof of purpose. Travelers were asked who they were, where they came from, and why they were moving. This questioning normalized the idea that movement must be explained. Today, explaining travel plans still feels expected, not intrusive. Borders in the medieval world were not lines on maps but zones of authority. Crossing into another lord's territory meant entering a new legal world. Permission mattered more than distance. This shaped the habit of respecting invisible boundaries. Modern borders inherit this logic even when they are peaceful. Even the idea of suspicious movement is medieval. Wandering without purpose raised concern. Beggars, travelers, and strangers were monitored. Stability was valued. Movement suggested instability or threat. This belief lingers in modern discomfort around those who move without clear purpose. From a historical perspective, modern travel rules are not about efficiency alone. They are about control learned over centuries. Medieval societies trained people to associate safety with permission. That lesson survived. As this part continues quietly, imagine a medieval road stretching between towns. A traveler pauses at a gate, papers in hand. Guards watch. Movement waits for approval. That pause still shapes how we travel today. The way we control joy, laughter, noise, and celebration in public spaces is deeply shaped by medieval rules that once governed order and obedience. Today, we often feel uneasy when joy becomes loud, unstructured, or prolonged. Too much laughter can feel inappropriate. Too much celebration can feel suspicious. These feelings are not modern manners. They are medieval discipline. In medieval society, public joy was regulated carefully. Crowds were powerful and dangerous. Uncontrolled celebration could turn into disorder, rebellion, or violence. For this reason, authorities allowed joy only at specific times and under strict rules. Festivals, feasts, and holidays existed, but they were scheduled, supervised, and limited. Medieval festivals followed calendars set by the church and local lords. People were permitted to celebrate, but only when told to do so. Outside of these moments, excessive joy could be seen as disrespectful or threatening. This created a sharp divide between allowed joy and inappropriate joy. That divide still exists today. Noise was especially regulated. Loud voices, singing, or laughter outside approved occasions could draw attention. Attention was dangerous in a hierarchical society. Being noticed meant being judged. This trained people to keep joy contained. Even today, many people feel uncomfortable laughing loudly in public or expressing excitement openly. The discomfort is historical. Public spaces in medieval towns were monitored closely. Markets, streets, and squares were places of business and authority. Disorder in these spaces challenged control. Celebrations were often confined to specific locations and times. Modern rules about noise levels, public behavior, and disturbing the peace follow the same logic. Even during permitted celebrations, behavior was controlled. Medieval authorities watched crowds carefully. Drunkenness, excessive dancing, or mocking authority could bring punishment. Joy was allowed, but not freedom. This trained people to celebrate cautiously, a habit that still shapes modern social behavior. Religious influence strengthened these rules. Excessive joy was sometimes linked to sin, temptation, or loss of self-control. Moderation was praised. Restraint was moral. These beliefs shaped how people expressed emotion. Even today, emotional restraint is often valued over open expression, especially in formal settings. The idea that joy must be earned also comes from medieval structure. Work came first. Celebration followed. This sequence was enforced. Modern discomfort around enjoying oneself without productivity reflects this long conditioning. From a historical perspective, modern discomfort with unstructured joy is not personal. It is inherited. Medieval society needed predictable behavior. Joy, like everything else, had to be controlled. As this part continues quietly, imagine a medieval town on a festival day. Music plays, but within boundaries. Laughter rises, but not too loud. Guards watch. Joy is present, but measured. That careful celebration still echoes in how we express happiness today. The deep discomfort many people feel around mess, disorder, and chaos is not simply a modern preference for cleanliness or efficiency. It is rooted in medieval rules that once equated order with safety, morality, and survival. In medieval society, visible order was not decorative. It was proof that authority still held power and that danger had been kept at bay. Medieval towns, households, and institutions relied heavily on visible order to prevent fear and suspicion. A messy space suggested neglect. Neglect suggested weakness. Weakness invited danger. Because of this chain of belief, order became a moral signal. Clean floors, arranged tools, orderly movement, and controlled behavior reassured everyone that the world was still functioning as it should. In medieval homes, order was enforced daily. Objects had designated places. Tools were stored carefully. Food preparation followed strict routines. Disorder could attract pests, illness, or social criticism. But beyond practicality, disorder implied moral failure. A chaotic household reflected poorly on the head of the family, especially women who were held responsible for domestic order. This expectation still survives in subtle ways today. Public order mattered even more. Medieval authorities believed chaos led directly to rebellion. Crowds, noise, cluttered streets, and uncontrolled movement created fear. Laws regulated street cleanliness, waste disposal, and even how goods were displayed in markets. These rules were enforced not only for hygiene but to maintain visual control. A tidy street signaled obedience. This belief shaped emotional responses that still exist. Mess feels stressful not because it is dangerous, but because centuries of association taught people that disorder meant loss of control. Even today, chaos triggers anxiety far beyond practical inconvenience. The medieval obsession with proper behavior grew from the same source. Proper behavior was predictable behavior. Predictability allowed authority to function. People who acted unpredictably were viewed with suspicion. They disrupted order. Modern discomfort around people who break norms, speak out of turn, or behave unpredictably reflects this historical fear of disorder. Religious influence reinforced this mindset. Medieval Christianity emphasized order as divine. God was believed to have created a structured universe. Disorder suggested sin or spiritual failure. Cleanliness, order, and restraint reflected inner virtue. These beliefs trained people to equate moral goodness with external order. Institutions like monasteries embodied this principle fully. Everything had a place. Every action followed a schedule. Silence, symmetry, and repetition created an environment where disorder felt threatening. These environments shaped later ideas of professionalism, discipline, and proper conduct. Even punishment reflected fear of disorder. Public punishment was meant to restore visible order. Chaos was corrected publicly, so others would internalize control. Over time, this external control became internal discomfort. People learned to self-regulate before authority intervened. From a historical perspective, modern anxiety around mess and chaos is not irrational. It is inherited conditioning. Medieval society trained people to associate order with safety and chaos with danger. That lesson survived even when the danger disappeared. As this long part continues quietly, imagine a medieval street at dawn. Shopkeepers sweep doorways. Tools are aligned. Waste is removed. Order settles in before the day begins. That same urge to restore order still moves through us today. Respect for age and obedience to elders is one of the most deeply rooted medieval rules still shaping modern behavior. Today, we often treat this respect as moral instinct or cultural value. Historically, it was a survival rule. In medieval society, age was closely linked to authority, knowledge, and stability in a world where written information was limited and life was uncertain. Medieval communities relied on memory rather than records. Elders carried knowledge of land boundaries, family ties, local laws, farming cycles, and past conflicts. This knowledge was essential. Disrespecting elders was not just rude, it threatened continuity. Obedience to age protected communal memory. Authority in medieval households was structured by age. The oldest male or female often held decision-making power. Younger members were expected to obey without question. This hierarchy reduced conflict and ensured clear control. Over time, obedience became habit rather than strategy. Age also carried moral weight. Medieval thought linked age with wisdom and restraint. Youth was associated with impulse and disorder. This belief justified obedience. Even when elders were wrong, obedience was still expected. Challenging age challenged order. This is why modern discomfort around questioning elders feels emotional rather than logical. The hesitation is inherited. Medieval society punished disrespect to age through shame, exclusion, or correction. That punishment no longer exists, but the emotional response remains. Public life reinforced this rule. Councils, courts, and religious leadership were dominated by older individuals. Speaking over elders was seen as arrogance. Silence showed humility. These patterns shaped how speech and authority interacted across generations. Even today, age often commands respect in conversations, workplaces, and families, regardless of actual expertise. The instinct to defer is medieval. It formed when age was the closest thing to experience-based authority. From a historical perspective, respect for elders survived because it stabilized society. It reduced conflict and preserved knowledge. Even when written records replaced memory, the behavior remained. As this part continues quietly, imagine a medieval village gathering. Elders speak first, others listen. Decisions follow age. That posture still shapes how we respond today. The fear of public judgment, shame, and the question of what will people say is one of the strongest emotional rules inherited from medieval society. Today, this fear feels personal, even psychological. In the medieval world, it was social law. Public opinion was not soft or abstract. It had power to punish, exclude, and destroy lives. Medieval communities were small and tightly connected. Privacy was rare. Reputation was everything. A person's survival depended on trust, cooperation, and acceptance by others. Losing reputation meant losing protection. Shame was therefore a tool of control more powerful than imprisonment. Punishment in medieval times was often public by design. Stocks, pillories, public confession, and shaming rituals existed to correct behavior through visibility. The goal was not only to punish the offender, but to teach the community. Seeing someone humiliated trained others to obey. Over time, fear of public shame became internalized. Even minor offenses could result in public embarrassment. Wearing signs, standing in public spaces, or being named aloud were common penalties. These punishments targeted dignity rather than the body. Medieval authorities understood that social pain lasted longer than physical pain. Religious practice strengthened this system. Confession was public or semi-public. Sin was something to be seen, named, and corrected. Moral failure was not private. It belonged to the community. This belief shaped deep internal monitoring of behavior. People judged themselves before others could. This is why modern shame often appears without direct threat. People feel embarrassment or guilt even when no one is watching. The medieval system succeeded so well that the crowd moved inside the mind. Public judgment also enforced conformity. Behaving differently attracted attention. Attention brought risk. This trained people to blend in, follow norms, and avoid standing out. Modern discomfort with being judged, mocked, or criticized online echoes this long history of communal surveillance. The phrase, "what will people say," captures medieval logic perfectly. It reflects a time when people's opinions had direct consequences. That fear remains, even when modern society no longer punishes publicly in the same way. From a historical perspective, shame replaced law in many situations. It was efficient, lasting, and self-sustaining. Once internalized, it required no authority to function. As this part continues quietly, imagine a medieval square. A crowd gathers. Someone stands exposed, judged by many eyes. Silence falls heavy. That moment taught generations to fear public judgment. The lesson still lives within us. The pressure to fit in, to behave like others, and to avoid standing out is another quiet rule inherited from medieval life. Today, conformity often feels social or cultural. In the medieval world, it was protective. Being similar meant being safe. Difference invited attention, and attention invited danger. Medieval society relied on sameness to maintain order. Clothing, speech, behavior, and belief followed strict patterns. Deviating from these patterns made a person visible. Visibility in a hierarchical society was risky. Authorities watched difference closely. Communities feared it. As a result, people learned to blend in rather than express individuality. Religion reinforced conformity strongly. Belief systems were shared, public, and enforced. Diverging beliefs could be labeled heresy. Heresy was not simply disagreement. It was seen as threat to social and divine order. Punishments for difference could be severe. This created deep fear of standing apart. Occupations also reinforced sameness. Guilds controlled how people worked, dressed, and behaved. Apprentices copied masters. Innovation was slow and cautious. Doing things differently suggested arrogance or disobedience. This shaped the habit of following established ways rather than experimenting freely. Language and accent marked belonging. Speaking differently could reveal outsider status. Outsiders were viewed with suspicion. This taught people to adopt local speech and mannerisms quickly. Modern anxiety about sounding different or out of place reflects this medieval fear of exclusion. Customs around celebration, mourning, and daily routine also demanded conformity. Participating correctly showed loyalty. Failure to participate drew attention. Even joy and grief had approved forms. This limited emotional expression but increased predictability. Over time, conformity became internalized. People began to police themselves. They learned what was acceptable and stayed within it. This reduced the need for constant enforcement. Modern discomfort with being different often arises before any judgment occurs. The rule lives inside. From a historical perspective, conformity was not about creativity or suppression. It was about safety. Medieval society was fragile. Order mattered more than individuality. That value system trained generations to fear difference. As this part continues quietly, imagine a medieval street. Everyone dresses similarly. Everyone moves the same way. Difference is visible, and visibility is dangerous. That lesson still whispers through modern life. The idea that rules must be followed simply because they exist is one of the most powerful inheritances from medieval society. Even today, people often obey rules without questioning their purpose, fairness, or relevance. The phrase "rules are rules" feels natural, firm, and unquestionable. Historically, this mindset was carefully built, reinforced, and preserved because medieval life depended on obedience more than understanding. In the medieval world, rules were not designed to be debated. They were designed to be obeyed. Authority flowed from God, king, lord, church, and tradition. Questioning rules meant questioning authority itself. That act could be interpreted as rebellion, heresy, or disorder. As a result, rules gained moral weight. They were not tools. They were truths. Most medieval people did not know why rules existed. Explanations were unnecessary and often unavailable. Literacy was limited. Law was complex. Custom mattered more than written justification. People followed rules because they always had. Tradition became authority. This is why the phrase, "it has always been done this way," still carries power today. Its roots are medieval. Rules in medieval society regulated nearly every aspect of life: where you could live, what you could wear, when you could work, how you could speak, and whom you could marry. Obedience created predictability. Predictability reduced violence. In a fragile society, that mattered more than fairness. Rules did not need to be reasonable. They needed to be stable. Punishment reinforced this mindset. Breaking a rule, even a small one, could bring harsh consequences. Importantly, punishment did not always match harm. It matched disobedience. This taught people that the act of breaking a rule was itself dangerous, regardless of outcome. Over time, fear attached itself to disobedience rather than wrongdoing. That fear still exists today. Medieval law also blurred the line between legal rules and moral rules. Breaking a rule was often seen as immoral, sinful, or shameful. This fusion created internal obedience. People did not just fear punishment, they feared being wrong. Modern discomfort around rule breaking often feels moral rather than practical. That feeling is inherited. Custom played a huge role. Many medieval rules were unwritten yet strictly enforced. Villages had customs governing behavior that carried the force of law. Violating custom could result in exclusion or shame. Because customs lacked explanation, people learned not to ask questions. Obedience became automatic. Authority figures reinforced this daily. Lords, priests, elders, and officials modeled unquestioning obedience to higher authority, while demanding obedience from those below. This vertical structure taught people that rules flowed downward, and questioning flowed upward only with permission. Modern hierarchical systems still follow this pattern. The medieval church strengthened rule obedience further. Religious rules governed behavior even when no human authority was present. God was believed to see everything. This belief created constant internal surveillance. Even alone, people obeyed rules. This internalization was one of the most effective forms of control ever created. Over generations, obedience detached from fear and became habit. Children were trained early to follow rules without explanation. Discipline reinforced compliance. Over time, asking why felt dangerous or disrespectful. That emotional reaction remains visible today when questioning rules is labeled as troublemaking. From a historical perspective, blind rule following is not a flaw of modern people. It is a survival strategy inherited from a time when questioning rules could destroy lives. The conditions changed. The behavior stayed. As this long part continues quietly, imagine a medieval village governed by custom. No signs explain the rules. Everyone knows them. No one asks why. Order holds. That same silence still shapes how we treat rules today. As this long historical exploration gently comes to rest, the medieval world slowly steps back into the shadows where it has always lived, quietly shaping behavior rather than announcing itself. What we have seen across these parts is not a list of strange habits, but a system. Medieval rules were never random. They were responses to fear, scarcity, hierarchy, and instability. They kept societies functioning when survival was uncertain and authority fragile. Over centuries, these rules moved from law into custom, from custom into habit, and from habit into instinct. Standing for authority, waiting your turn, obeying time, fearing judgment, respecting age, following rules without question. Each behavior once protected lives. Once learned deeply enough, they no longer needed enforcement. They lived on inside people. When the medieval world faded, its structures collapsed, but its training remained. New governments formed. New technologies appeared. Yet behavior changes slower than systems. The body remembers longer than the law. What once prevented punishment now simply feels right. Historically, this explains why so many modern rules feel emotionally powerful, but logically unnecessary. The emotion is older than the reason. Medieval society taught people to obey first and understand later. That lesson worked so well, it outlived the danger. None of this means these rules are wrong. It means they are inherited. They belong to a different world, one where order meant safety and difference meant risk. Understanding their origin does not demand rejection. It offers clarity. When we recognize where habits come from, they loosen their grip. History gives distance. From a historical perspective, medieval rules did not fail. They succeeded completely. They shaped generations so thoroughly that their influence crossed centuries unnoticed. That is their legacy. As the night grows quieter, imagine medieval streets emptying. Bells fall silent. Rules fade back into memory. What remains is awareness, gentle, calm, and unforced.